So hi everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day 4 of the Solidarity in Diversity, highlighting marginal voices in academia, practice, and society conference, presented by the African Studies Group with the Melbourne Social Equity Institute. So I'm Katy Chan, PhD candidate from the School of Social and Political Sciences of the University of Melbourne. I'm here to guide you through today's program. I will be with you all day. But before we start today, please allow me to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're on and pay respects to their elders past and present. African Studies Group, the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, and I recognize and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to their ancestral lands, which continue to be important to the First Nations peoples living today. So today our program is going to run until 5:30 in the afternoon with 2 panels. In the morning, we are having our first practitioner panel on topic of support. In the afternoon, we will have our second practitioner panel where we will have the wonderful chance to learn and discuss about Professor Mahmoud Mandani's book, Neither Settler Nor Native, The Making and Unmaking of Permanent Minorities. So now I'm going to introduce you the chair of our first practitioner panel, Anthea Hancocks. She's from the Scanlon Foundation. She's the CEO of the foundation and the research institute of the foundation, which commits to the cause of social cohesion. Anthea has an extensive background in strategic planning, business development, community service, education, communications, and marketing through senior leadership experience in different sectors. She is also a member of the Australian Multicultural Council, a mediator, chair of Welcoming Australia, chair of the advisory committee of the Huddle, chair of the Ubuntu Projects Advisory Board, and a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So now, without further ado, let me pass the time to Anthea so we can have the first panel of today. Let's welcome Anthea.
Thank you very much, Katy, and I'd like to thank all the organisers for inviting me to facilitate this session and congratulate them all on everything that they've achieved in bringing this conference to life. The topic discussed over these past days are vitally important to how we respond to the challenges of today and into the future. Whether we agree or disagree with the views that have been shared, they make us think and consider our behaviour and the ideas and policies that we will seek to influence. This morning's session is specifically looking at support, focusing on initiatives that support diversity, solidarity and inclusion in a range of situations. Firstly, and most importantly, as Katy did, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to the elders past, present, emerging, and to any who are joining us today. Thank you. For any of you who have engaged with the previous sessions, you will know that when it comes to the issues being raised here, there is a diversity of opinion. And this morning, we're going to hear from three other voices. First of all, Professor Julie Willis will address diversity and inclusion in the university setting. Dr. Carlos Morreo will speak to the challenge of building spaces for solidarity, inclusion and diversity. And finally, Stephen Ho will share his thoughts on what comes next. Each will have 15 minutes to introduce you to their work and ideas, and this will be followed by the panel addressing your questions. Now, you can, if you wish, you can put your questions into the chat, but we will actually take everybody's questions as they demonstrate by putting up their hand at the end of the 3 presentations. So if you're comfortable, I think what we'll do is to kick off, and I will hand it over to Professor Willis. Now, Professor Willis is a Professor of Architecture and Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. She's an authority on the history of Australian architecture from 1890 to 1950, and has undertaken significant projects researching and development of modern hospital architecture in Australia, the importance of public buildings in community, civic and national identity, architecture during wartime and its subsequent impact on practice and production, and equity and diversity in the Australian architecture profession. Her current research includes writing a new short history of Australian architecture, the transmission and translation of architectural knowledge through professional networks in architecture, and the design of hospitals and their positive effect on patient wellbeing, and certainly something that we all need to be thinking about right now. So thank you, Julie, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Anthea. Thank you also for that introduction, which talks about my professional career in architecture, in particular my research area. But I'm here today really as the chair of the university's Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the University of Melbourne's University Executive Committee. So thank you for inviting me. And I want to talk today about the university's new diversity and inclusion strategy, which is within a few weeks of being launched. So as chair of the D&I committee, or DISCO as we like to call it, it's my role to oversee the development and implementation of that new D&I strategy that for the first time encompasses staff and students within its scope, and that considers also our relationship with partners, affiliates, and the broader university community. And there are a number of new important elements to our new strategy. So it's the first time the university has articulated that it encompasses the whole community. It affirms the notion that we are one university community whose success and well-being are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. The strategy is evidence-based. It's been developed in response to the analysis of data, consultation and other inputs from across our community about what matters to them in this space. And it's been written to address those concerns. But I should add, and as I talk about this, you'll understand that there will be many more opportunities to have input into the action plans that sit underneath the strategy. The strategy identifies cross-cutting focus areas that will build diversity and strengthen inclusion for many community members, but also identifies a need for targeted plans that address the barriers and disadvantage experienced by specific groups within our community. We need this strategy because we have legacies of exclusion and injustice in the university and broader community that have become embedded in our structures, systems, and practices over time. These legacies can generate or exacerbate inequalities of experience and opportunity for our community members. Historically, they've favoured the inclusion and advancement of some groups more than others. This potentially sees the university increasingly at odds with community expectations, and it's created barriers to the safety, inclusion, and belonging of all. We came to the point that what the university needed to do in this space was change, that our diversity and inclusion strategy is about the university as a whole changing, rather than those groups who may have been historically disadvantaged changing to join the university community. So our vision is for a thriving, fair and diverse university community working together respectfully to make a difference to each other and in the world. This vision captures some key ideas. Thriving, so that everybody can be their best and do their best work. We can realise our full potential in the workplace and learning environment beyond tokenistic inclusion. That is, being permitted to be here, but not to fully participate. Fairness. Our community want to see decisions made transparently and accountably, policies consistently applied, and the university taking responsibility for removing systemic barriers and addressing discrimination to ensure equality of opportunity for everyone. Diversity. Our community wants to see a more diverse staff and student body that better reflects and represents the diversity of the communities that we live in and better prepares us to meet the challenges of an increasingly globalised society. Respect. There are aspects of our organisational culture and hierarchical structures that don't promote mutual respect as a basic principle for all our interactions. This must change to support meaningful inclusion of all members of our community and to ensure that we can make a difference to each other and the world. So the strategy is just the beginning. I do want to share my screen if I will be allowed to. Let me just see if I can do this. Here you're looking at one of the pages from the new strategy, which is about to be launched. You can see here the various goals that we have: trust and recognition, diverse community, culture and belonging, diversity and inclusion being embedded. And we have the outcomes sitting below those. There are a series of strategic priorities and key enablers. Data and evidence is a foundation. Accountability processes, communication and engagement enable us to deliver on this strategy. And we need to make sure that we have effective leaders. We encourage and facilitate student equity and diversity. We address particular gaps. We create a fully accessible campus. We progress accreditation and ensure compliance with legislative frameworks, particularly the new gender equity requirements from the Victorian State Government. We look at staff entry points, pathways. We create a culturally safe university, and we focus on teaching and research to support this. There are a series of cross-cutting focus areas, and you can see those being explained a little more here. Importantly, there are those targeted action plans. You can see a band there. It doesn't explain what they are. But what we've taken the approach is that the strategy is the overall vision for what we do. Doesn't talk about specific communities or disadvantaged groups, but the action plans will really focus on that, and it enables us to have action plans which are appropriate for the time, as this is a long-running strategy, that the action plans can come and go. They can address particular gaps, they can progress accreditation, ensure compliance, but they allow us to have maximum flexibility. It's one of the reasons we don't see in this strategy the KPIs or targets and the responsibilities, because they will sit within the action plans. But this is meant to be a holistic approach to diversity and inclusion in the university, to capture the very broad remit that this space encompasses, and to understand that individuals don't necessarily neatly fit into one box or the other, that intersectionality is present across the spectrum, and that we need to be able to support people wherever they need assistance to access and feel welcome as part of our university community. I'll stop sharing there. And I'll bring my presentation to a close to say I'll really welcome the opportunity to talk more broadly on these matters and answer any questions they might be. I do want to note that the university, and when we look at the maturity of the various aspects of diversity and inclusion, the cultural and linguistic diversity is probably one of the less mature areas in which we need to do work in. We look forward to having input from right across the university community into developing plans to support culturally and linguistically diverse communities fully participate in the university community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was it looks to be very comprehensive, so it'll be really interesting to see how it's received and how it rolls out over the next few years. Now we move on to Dr. Carlos Morreo. Dr. Morreo is from the Institute of Postcolonial Studies, where he's the executive officer. He is a Venezuelan citizen who's living in both Nam and Melbourne, writing on theory, economy, and politics. Carlos taught global political economy and critical approaches to the development in the School of Politics and International Relations at the Australian National University in Canberra, where he completed his PhD. In Caracas, Carlos was a research fellow with the Centro de Estudios Latinoamericanos and a lecturer in social theory and in political philosophy. And he also taught within the political economy program in the newly created and pedagogically experimental university in, which I won't endeavour to pronounce because I'll only make a mess of it. So Carlos, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts as well.
Thank you very much, Anthea. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just first get the screen share up. And please tell me if you can see that now. A thumbs up will do. So I was, I was delighted to receive the invitation from the African Studies group to come and talk a little bit about IPCS and to use the opportunity to sort of reflect a little bit about what we're trying to do at the Institute of Postcolonial Studies. I thought I'd speak then for about 15 minutes about what kind of space we're trying to build at IPCS, right? So how you can think of the project of the Institute of Postcolonial Studies as a project that is largely about creating a particular kind of space for encouraging reflection, discussion, community, and relations to critical knowledges. I should begin by first acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri land. And in fact, the Institute itself also stands on Wurundjeri land. And I acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and that we stand on land that hasn't, was never ceded. So a brief, so what I want to talk about then is, as I said, a little bit about the Institute of Postcolonial Studies as a way of reflecting on some of the themes in the conference, and in particular kind of highlighting this question of what kind of spaces we're trying to build. So I thought I'd speak about what IPCS is, what we do, and that will pretty much get us to the end of the allotted time, and I'll then look forward to talking a little bit more during the Q&A. So let me begin by saying what IPCS is not, right? So IPCS is not a university, though we've had a close relationship with Melbourne University in particular over many, many years. And we were established in 1996 by disaffected academics from Melbourne University. So Professor Philip Darby and reader Michael Dutton, both from the School of Politics back then. And partly, and this is kind of interesting to highlight because there was a real sort of concern with where universities were headed in the 1990s, kind of the creeping corporate university, the neoliberalization of universities, and IPCS in a way was a response to that. So the need to create para-academic, educationally experimental projects that could foster other kinds of approaches to knowledge. So not like a university, though of course we have close relationships to universities. And we're not an academic association, so we're not like, say, the Development Studies Association or TASA, the Sociological Studies, the Australian Sociological Association. But we have many members who are, participants in these associations. And in fact, the Institute itself is very close to scholars and academics working in humanities and social sciences. And we're also not quite a community center, though like a community center, we have premises in North Melbourne on Curzon Street. And, we have a beautiful building in which we own outright. And the space that is our Curzon Street premise is really a lively hub where scholars, students, artists, writers, poets, activists, advocates, and others come together to share ideas, to work together, and to ask pressing questions. So we have elements of all three in a way, like a community center, a research institute, and a little bit like an academic association. But perhaps the best way to sort of capture this is by quoting what one of our members and fellows said recently in a conversation I had a couple of days ago. They said that we were like a community center for intellectual conversations, framed by particular knowledges. that IPCS, that the Institute of Postcolonial Studies was a space for making connections with people engaged in activism and academic projects. So IPCS, as I mentioned, was set up in 1996 during kind of the height of postcolonial studies. You know, when postcolonial studies was kind of doing its rounds and kind of affecting and transforming disciplines throughout universities. We are an independent public education project, a not-for-profit organization. And what is key to highlight here is that we are a membership-based organization, right? So in that sense, as I said, like academic associations. And membership is very important, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then the other point I want to highlight here is, as I said, the particular relationship we have to critical knowledges. So IPCS was then set up to foster, to hold, and to work with these knowledges that we can refer to as postcolonial knowledges, but they are anti-colonial, decolonial knowledges of the histories of resistance to colonialism, etc. In fact, our constitution, if you get to see it, spoke back then in 1996 of applied postcolonialism, which is perhaps a clumsy way of referring to that. So what do we do with these particular knowledges that we care about, that we privilege? We hold these knowledges, we foster and privilege particular knowledges in order to encourage people, members, friends of the Institute and our communities to ask the pressing questions that emerge within communities, but to do it in a way that can be framed by or guided by the critical knowledges that IPCS holds. And once again, what are these critical knowledges about? As I said, they are about colonialism, about capitalism, about racism. These are knowledges that draw on the histories of colonization and anti-colonial struggles, but also importantly about the creativity with which peoples and communities in the South and indigenous peoples have resisted these histories and kind of forwarded, advanced their struggles. Also, of course, the critique of Eurocentrism and the whiteness of knowledge is kind of has been a significant thread throughout postcolonial critique and decolonial studies. So, as I said, simply put, all these bodies of knowledges that IPCS privileges and holds and fosters, we can simply refer to as postcolonial knowledges. So IPCS holds these knowledges for its community of scholars, artists, and activists, and for their communities, right? So the communities of our members. And we hold these knowledges in basically three ways. We nurture and we foster these knowledges through our journal, Postcolonial Studies, which is the leading journal in the field in postcolonial studies and decolonial studies. A few other journals have emerged in recent years, but postcolonial studies still has very much kind of a trend-setting position in this regard. It's been going for over 24 years, 4 issues published each year, always really interesting debates and discussions, and it's a very transnational journal. So strongly cited here in NAM, in Melbourne, out of the Institute, but has a transnational community of editors working globally, contributing to these discussions. So we also hold these critical knowledges via our other publications, mainly the Writing Past Colonialism series we publish with Routledge. Always good to highlight that one of our very first publications was Patrick Wolf's Settler Colonialism and the Transformation of Anthropology, really a key text in what is now the settler colonial analytic, the settler colonial critique, which is very important for Indigenous struggles today. So this was an early publication that the Institute put forward almost 20 years ago, and has really kind of influenced and transformed the ways in which critiques of colonialism are taken today. And we also hold these knowledges in our reading room within our premises in Curzon Street. And members and friends and communities are welcome to come to IPCS to work in our reading room and to work with our specialist library that, as I said, holds volumes on these discussions. The reading room to the right the Philip Darby reading room to the right, and the Ashish Nandi room to the left there on your screen, where we have performances and presentations and things. A little bit quiet right now during COVID, but soon enough we'll have things happening there again. So I kind of stress this point about the knowledges we hold, but then the next question might be, well, what do we do with these knowledges? I sort of stress that we encourage members and communities and others to come and work with this, but to be quite clear, we do this via we work with these knowledges, with these critical knowledges on colonialism and anti-colonialism. Via our public program of events. We have a wide-ranging public event program throughout the year. And we have reading, writing, and discussion groups regularly meeting at IPCS on a weekly and fortnightly basis. And most importantly, and it's this that I want to stress in the next couple of minutes, we have a visiting fellows program. And our visiting fellows are welcomed to the Institute to advance projects that are also engaging with these critical knowledges. So one way in which to think of IPCS is to say that we are a site for an ongoing invitation for communities to gather and transform their realities. And one of the ways in which we're doing this, I would say quite simply, is through the Visiting Fellows program, which is what I want to talk about now. So we invite members of the Institute to deepen their relationship with their communities and with these critical knowledges that we hold. Visiting fellows join us then for a year or two to advance the project that will kind of take IPCS to communities, bring communities to IPCS, and IPCS seeks to then provide a platform to support this work and the related discussions that the projects develop. Here we have an image of one such meeting and discussion in support of one of these projects. That's Dr. Mahmoud Aidani there to the left, a playwright who's advancing a collaborative theatre project with recently resettled Iranian refugees in Melbourne. And it's a collaborative theatre project exploring questions of identity and belonging, right? So this is one of our such visiting fellow projects. We have 8 such projects happening right now on IPCS. I can't talk about all of them, of course, so I'll just highlight 3 or 4. One such project is by Eda Seyhan. Eda Seyhan is an independent scholar, a human rights lawyer, and an activist. And Eda's project looks at activism and diaspora politics, in particular around the Turkish community in Melbourne. So her work is tracing how Turkish activism in Melbourne shifted from the 1980s to today, an earlier work that was very concerned or premised on kind of Marxist discourses, and today happening largely around questions of identity and positionality. So her work is engaging with these different generations of members of the Turkish community who've had kind of who've been engaged in activism and politics here and back in Turkey. And through her project, of course, IPCS is closer to this community, facilitates a space for the community's own self-reflection in a way, and also opens itself up to transformation by bringing, by welcoming members of these different communities. Another such project is one by Dr. Suleika Arashido. Suleika is a Uchinanchu scholar. The Uchinanchu people are also known as the Okinawan people from southern Japan, colonized in Japan. And Suleika's project is a simple and beautiful project. It's essentially a matter of kind of fostering conversations and documenting conversations between elders, Indigenous elders, Uchinanchu Indigenous elders, and Australian First Nations peoples. We also have another very exciting project by Jasmine Barsani. Jasmine is an Iranian Kurdish activist, and her project Bendigo Street is a documentary and largely focused on homelessness. And at the center of her project is also this engagement with the critical knowledges that I was referring to. So her project is concerned with kind of the logics of Indigenous dispossession influencing notions of property in Australia that reproduce homelessness, right? So her project seeks to kind of explore and engage with these discussions by focusing on the squatting advanced by different activists around Bendigo Street in Collingwood in 2016. And as I mentioned a little while ago, another interesting project is the one advanced by Mahmoud Aidani, an Iranian playwright, working with recently resettled migrants and refugees. And a project, as I said, exploring questions of belonging, identity, and life in Melbourne. We also have a series of, might be worthwhile very briefly saying something about kind of things that we're planning for later in the year. So we're very interested in, and we're trying to support conversations and discussions happening around the treaty process in Victoria. As you can see, if we hold these knowledges and if we have membership and networks that we can pull on, well, it's important for us to do so in order to shed light and on this matter, and to sort of encourage discussions on this. So together with Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization, Deakin University, last year we held a series of really interesting discussions on seminars on decolonizing truth in Australia. The keynote was offered by First Nations Cherokee scholar Jeff Contassel, who gave a really inspiring talk on truth-telling, reconciliation, and Indigenous nationhood. All this material is documented, recorded on our website, and you're welcome to come and see it. And we also had Lyndall Ryan, who's a historian who's been, some of you might know, been doing this very important work, mapping colonial frontier massacres in Australia. And she also spoke at this series of seminars last year as part of our discussions on contributing to understanding and approaching treaty. And later in this year, we hope to do the same, but this time we want to call on First Nations experiences in post-conflict societies such as Colombia and Guatemala, where there's been a lot of interesting and important discussions on treaty and reconciliation as well. So we want to call on friends, peers, and members of our members of the Institute and others close to our network that can kind of come and shed light on these discussions. One of the presentations in that seminar last year that I mentioned was by Yin Paridis, and which was also published in our journal. So there you see this link between the knowledges we're presenting and the knowledges we hold, we foster, and the work that the journal is also doing. So to conclude, what are we building? What are the spaces that we're building in IPCS? Well, we're building a network and community of scholars, artists, and activists. We are building, fostering, holding critical knowledges. We're building collaborations and projects with fellows and communities. And we're contributing to the critical self-reflection of all by doing the work that we're doing. So we're building a space where pressing matters are raised and responded to in critical, creative, practical, ethical, and substantial ways. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Carlos. That was really absolutely fascinating, and reinforces just how important an institute such as yours actually is. And I'm quite sure it will have generated quite a lot of really interesting questions for you about how this gets applied more broadly into our communities. Next, though, before we move on to that, is Stephen Ho. I'm particularly keen to introduce Stephen because he grew up as a minority ethnic Chinese in newly independent Malaysia. With only a basic understanding in English, he came to Australia to study in the late 1970s. But not only did he graduate as a minority Asian, he managed to work for some of the world's largest companies, including attaining senior positions in BHP, traveling globally and making major achievements. He left BHP on his own accord in 2013 because there was more to life, driven by his belief in social equity and moral imperatives. Stephen, I think you've certainly got us all wondering exactly how all of this experience that you've had is playing out in your thoughts today. We'd like to hear from you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthea. And I noticed that I do have more time now because the others finished. And I was wondering whether I can actually finish in time, and because I've got so many things to tell you, all of you all. But thanks for the great introduction, Anthea. And before I start, I'd like to thank the organizers, especially the African Studies group, who invited me to this. And it's really strange how all this happened, but where we met, I called for a meeting actually about 3 or 4 months ago with Kennedy, Matthew, and Franca, and Karen as well. And as a result of that, this happened actually. So I'm quite happy that this actually happened, this whole conference. So as I said, I'd like to thank the organizers, the African Studies group, the Melbourne Social Institute, and the University of Melbourne for organizing this and inviting me to speak. I'd like to thank all the sponsors as well, and all the participants, and all of you all was on the line listening to this. So I'm glad all of you are here today. Now, I've read and heard actually a lot of what has been said, and of the struggles and challenges faced by, not just peoples of Africa, but minorities, underprivileged, and so on and so on. And for some of you, most of this are actually happening in Australia as well. And and also I've followed up and see, read and heard what you have done, created initiatives, developed ideas, and some have done great things in academia as well. I do know that the conference is titled Solidarity in Diversity, highlighting marginal voices in academia, practice, and society, and that this session is about support. But before I want to talk about that, actually, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. If it could be believed, actually, I was once a marginal, a minority, not once, but 3 or 4 times, and I still believe I am a minority today. But in reflection over the course of my life, when I look back, did it actually matter? And if it did, how did I manage it? Possibly like most of you, on this call today, you came first as a student, possibly, and secondly, it became your home. Many of us will face hurdles for one reason or another, whether it's fitting into society, and I'm talking about the Australian society here, getting an education, getting not just a job, but something that you love to do, or even developing or running a business. Now, I know our journeys are different, but I think our objectives may be similar or even the same. So let me tell you my story. As what Anthea said, I was born in Malaysia to ethnic parents who came from China. I was a minority in Malaysia. The Malays were the dominant race in the country, comprising more than 70% of the population. So government policies at the time, prevented me actually and made it very difficult for me to continue my education, especially on the tertiary level. So I actually had no choice. I had to go elsewhere if I wanted to seek an education at the university level. So I came to Melbourne. Why? Why Melbourne? Well, it was the nearest Western nation actually in this part of the world, where Malaysia was. I came as a foreign student to study HSC. I was barely conversant in English. My father gave me $1,500, and that's all I had for 5 years of education in Australia, $1,500. And when I came, I didn't even know where my school was. I didn't know how to get to my school. But anyway, it's a long story. I did get to school, finished my schooling, go into engineering at the University of Melbourne. As I said, I didn't have much money, so I could only buy the cheapest of everything, from food to clothes. I couldn't even afford to take public transport. I walked to school. But I did manage to finish school, as I said, and I got into a university, and I got an engineering degree. And in all that time, $1,500 can't last very long. So to be truthful, I had to work. So I worked as a laborer in factories, even as a truck driver. I did anything to survive, but I survived. I came alone. I did not know anyone. My first English test, you wouldn't believe it, I still have it today. My English teacher gave me a zero for my English. So hopefully today all of you can understand what I'm saying, because I got a zero about 40 years ago. Okay, so I did pass my HSC, just passed it, 50%, going to uni, I got my degree, right? So I can go on and on. As to food, for those of us who are old enough, the only Asian food was in Chinatown. Now, firstly, it was too far to get there from my school. I studied in Faulkner, by the way, and that I couldn't even afford it. So that was out of the question. So I had to change my diet. But I survived. And let's not talk about the weather. Before I came to Melbourne, I never had a day, below 25 degrees. Today, I'm wearing all this and I've got used to it. So again, I survived. And I graduated. And when I finished my degree, I returned to Malaysia to seek work. And I wouldn't believe it today, actually, when I came back, I returned the $1,500 to my father. And I still had surplus cash. Okay. So, and all this time, I was a minority in Australia. I'm not sure whether I was marginalized, maybe because I hadn't thought of it at that time, what a marginal was. So it didn't matter to me. So anyway, I returned to Malaysia to look for work. But again, I became a minority again, right? Well, I was never, it was not again, but I remained a minority. So, but here in Malaysia, I do feel marginalized. I'm going to get a good job. Those are good jobs are reserved for the Malay race. And I had to go elsewhere to look for work. So I went to Singapore. But I did learn a lot more, but I thought if I wanted to learn more about what I want to do, I'm an engineer, I had to go to a Western nation. The only one I knew was Australia. So I came back to Australia in 1991. And for those who can remember this as well, I came at the worst of the recession. For those who can remember, during the Paul Keating years. So with interest rates at 20%, whatever. God, I spent months unemployed with a wife who's pregnant and a 1-year-old daughter in tow. But eventually, I found a job, and I survived. Right. So steadily, I made progress, and as Anthea said, I did find work at the end of the day with BHP. Luckily, so my last employer was with BHP. I started on the lowest rung in 1991. It was the end of 1991, but by the time I left in 2013, I was in the top 30 in the organization, reporting to the executive committee. I left in 2013 because of the realization there was more than life than just working as a salaried person in a company. So why am I telling you all this? I think I'm like most of you all actually, on this call here. I've always been a minority and at times marginalized. I think I had one advantage. I didn't know what a minority meant or mattered, so I focused on myself. In Malaysia, while there was solidarity amongst the minority Chinese, there weren't enough of us to matter. In Australia, when I was here, there was no solidarity among the Chinese. There were too few of us again. Diversity was not seen as something valuable like what we see today. When we spoke about diversity back then, it was about food. And today a lot of us talk about things about food when we talk about diversity. Inclusion was not even a concept, but here am I today, and I've survived all that. So when I look at why it seems that I've succeeded in with all these hurdles, what made it happen? So I believe, okay, and on a personal level, and I'll talk about the externals later on. When I look back, I think I did something that maybe others didn't do. I had a strong belief in myself, and when I look back, it's very important to know yourself and to be yourself, not to be somebody else. You got to play with your strengths, not your weaknesses. Do what you love and be good at it. If you look back, you've always gone back to doing what you're always strong with. So that's what I did. But if you wish to compete with others and you're weak at it, then you need to work hard at it, or to learn it, or to get an education to go forward. And I do think the education is very important. It is what got me here today. And I never saw the negatives. I refused. Even the most difficult times, I prefer to turn a negative into a positive. But again, I never saw a negative. I worked hard. When I decided on something, I would just go for it. I never looked back. But at times, I have to adapt as I went along. I could think smarter. I use my strengths again. I don't do the things that I'm weak at. But all times I remember, I stay focused on the end objectives. I also remember what my mom and my dad, and probably your mom and dad told you as well. In doing anything that you love, you've got to be patient and persevere with it. And I did. I spoke less and I listened more. Instead of asking and taking from others and whatever, I gave and shared. And I respected views of where they come from and who they may be. And because I believe that in giving respect, you will also receive respect. Might take time, but you will come. Now, let's talk about support. I had actually support all this while. I didn't know it until it's only reflection that I look back and I saw that I had support. If I can put a catalyst that made it all happen for me. For those of you who can remember this as well, in Australia between 1974 and 78, the Whitlam government announced that all education would be free. When it was announced, I grabbed it. And I came to Australia and got a free education. So if you can call it support, well, I call it support. But there are breaks in life. If it happens, you just got to go for it and take it. So I took it. My father dangled $1,500 to me. I grabbed the money and I flew to Australia. So that was an opportunity. When I came, I didn't know how to get around. My language was not good enough. But they were foreign students and they were migrants. So I got into these chats or groups or whatever forums with them. And there were very few of us, but we helped out each other. Then there were the teachers. Some were like mothers and uncles and fathers to me who guided me in life. I mean, I came as a 16-year-old and they guided me and they helped me with my life. How to do simple things like even know how to cook, how to sew, how to look after oneself. And then there was the public. And they were so generous with their help on showing me where to go, how to take a bus, take a train, so I could go to school. So that's how I went to school. But at the end of the day, I would say that the public at that time didn't really know how to deal with us, and maybe the problem still remains today, but I have to acknowledge they did help me. So I'm indebted to the support I got. It came from different places, and as I say, it's only through later on in life that I reflected on this, and that I classify this as quite important in my life. At BHA, I work across various disciplines, actually, from oil and gas, iron ore, exploration, business planning, mergers and acquisitions, business development, marketing, HR, facilities management. So I did the whole thing. That's why, after doing all this, what's the point of it? It's time to go. And I left. So, and I went into actually doing businesses. And I need to tell others as well, I failed in my first business, but it didn't stop me. I did it again one more time. So I'm into my second business today, and I'm not sure I've actually succeeded, but I'm not stopping. So today I'm actually a smart building consultant and also an entrepreneur. And when I began to think more about this, when why I left BHP and why this next part of my talk actually, and why am I doing this? I've been thinking about is life all about this? Is it all about just looking after myself, my family, and the people around me? And should I do more to lift myself a little bit higher, to consider others in my community and society at large? And perhaps that will give me a wholesome life. So that's why I'm doing this. And but 2 or 3 years ago, I actually contacted the university and supported quite a few programs. I'll just list them out, some of them. In engineering, I'm actually supporting work on 5G studies with 2 PhD students, and I'm actually sponsoring that. In film and media, I'm supporting final year students on their filmmaking. I've actually got an award with the university on biomedical engineering. It's an innovation award. And I'm also doing something with the African Studies group with some funding, and I'd like to do more actually. I do mentor students as well, so that I've got my hands full. That's why I'm doing this. I felt that whether you call it charity or whether you call it giving back, it's not always monetary, but sometimes giving time as well, sharing my knowledge and experience, and most importantly, my mistakes. Actually made a lot of them in life, like to share them with others. Hence, I love mentoring. So I continue to look at where I can help others, possibly through entrepreneurship and mentoring. But I do believe that it has to be done in partnership. The person who supports, if it was me, and the person who supports, we need to work together on this. And that is the initial support that's required to kickstart something. For someone in life, support should not be perpetual. On solidarity, diversity, and inclusion, I see it differently from maybe how others see it. To me, when I look at solidarity, I don't see it as a group of people or race or tribe. So I hate to use this term, but no, it's not about where you come from, about Kenyans or Ghanaians or Africans. Why not Asians? Why not Asian Africans? Why not Australians and beyond? So I see a solidarity as a grouping that's much larger. Ultimately, I suppose that's the end objective. It starts small and grow big, but I think we need to look at the bigger picture. In terms of diversity, I classify as push and pull. We seem to be always, when I read it, whether it's in media or to my own experience, pushing diversity into others. We should also invite diversity into our own grouping. Inclusion. We seem to ask to be included in others' program. We should also ask others to include themselves into what we do or our life and our what we our community. Conclusion is we can all do this, not just in solidarity, but individually on our personal level. And doing so means struggling, but to me struggling was never a failure and should not be a failure for anyone. As much as we wish things to happen for us, we have to make things happen for ourselves as well. So it's all up to us. But I do admit for us, initial support, for some of us, initial support will be required. And lastly, end of the story is I have 2 children. Both have got degrees. My daughter is working and married and lives in Sydney. And my son, believe it or not, although he was born in Australia, moved back to Malaysia to work. So it's a reversal, and he loves it there. Now, I'm happy with the actions and decisions I made in life, and I believe so can you. Thank you for listening, and I do hope my story will spur you on to achieve greater things, than to do the things you love and tell the stories to your children and your own grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was terrific, and it occurs to me as I listen to these 3 presentations that when we talk about support, what we're seeing is the structural support that Julie is working on, the intellectual support that Carlos is working on, and the inspirational support, Stephen, that you're bringing. So I might just encourage people to please put their hands up if they've got questions by putting it up by clicking on the raise hands button in the participants list if you've got questions for any of our speakers. But Stephen, I might start with one. I wonder whether or not you feel like you belong in Australian society now, and if you do, when did that occur? When do you think you got that sense of that feeling?
I think when I felt safe and secure and looked after. So I would say, and as I came back in 1991, I would say in the year 2000, where I didn't feel that I was insecure anymore. And then I felt I was part of society. And I think that's quite important actually in whatever we do, whether from an institutional point of view or country level, whatever, is once people feel secure, then all things seems to matter less, and they will feel to be part of the larger society. That's how I feel about it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Stephen. Now I can see we have a question from Daria. Daria, would you like to share your question?
You. Yes, first I really enjoyed all the presentations, and thanks to all the speakers. I have a question for Carlos. Thanks again for your presentation, very concise, and it's really inspiring to hear all the work, to hear about all the work that IPCS is doing. And it's actually a very genuine and special space, because it does not only hold knowledge, but also it is a home for researchers of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. So it is a very interesting position where IPCS administration has to balance private and professional life. So I wonder, how do you manage this from the ethical point of view, and how does it align with the fact that in Australia institutions still tend to be quite hierarchical? do you have any protocols on dealing with injustice within the IPCS and protecting minorities? For instance, issues of racism, family violence, or discrimination between tenants or institute staff? Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Dario. Thanks for that question. I mean, yes, you're right. So IPCS we're an interesting organization in that sense. So we, as you know, as I spoke in my presentation, we hold knowledges, we invite people to work with these knowledges, we encourage these projects from members and community, and but we're also a home in a way. We have PhD tenants who live at IPCS, who are engaged in different ways in IPCS projects, and of course in being student tenants, they also help them fund the project itself. Kind of what you highlight is important. It's important for us to sort of kind of develop appropriate policies and guidelines on these things. We have had tensions, we have had difficulties, of course, and it's certainly something, an opportunity for us to learn about and think more carefully about how kind of intra-community dynamics and intra-community politics can be worked on. Yeah, I'll leave that comment there. Thank you, Daria.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Now, I've just noticed there is a question in the chat, but I'll go first to Michelle.
Hello, Julie. I just wanted to give you a big heart warm thank you. I'm currently the coordinator of the Victorian Aboriginal Research Accord. Daniel Andrews made a promise for Victoria to have an accord, which would be like a charter for ethical research with Victorian Aboriginal communities. And one of our starting points is developing between the Victorian Aboriginal communities an MOU with University of Melbourne. And so to hear your presentation, it really warmed my heart with hope. And I'll be like, when I have these meetings, I'll be like, well, you guys need to talk to Julie. So thank you.
Oh.
And my question for yourself, Carlos, for myself as an Aboriginal researcher, and you know, when I talk to other Victorian Aboriginal academics, we struggle with the word post-colonial because we do not believe we are in a post-colonial space. So when I heard you present, I was like, okay, I've got to get my head around this. And it seemed to me when you're presenting, it's not so much stating that we are in a post-colonial state or space, but there is the hope, the intent to get there. Is my take correct?
Oh, Carlos, you've just gone on to mute.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, we're certainly not in a post-colonial society. Australia is a settler colonial society. You know, let's be super clear about that, of course. I mean, this is a kind of a discussion we've had for some time in different ways. So briefly put, post-colonialism, the term emerges initially kind of referencing the struggles of the kind of the anti-colonial movements in the, you know, throughout the mid 20th century, right? So we were looking at so when the term kind of comes into play and is settled as an interdisciplinary field in the university and outside the university, it initially refers to the struggles of anti-colonial movements in, you know, Africa, Asia, also, you know, the Caribbean, and earlier in Latin America. So the post-colonial kind of refers in a way to a reflection about the present and future of those societies after the end of formal colonialism. But immediately post-colonialism also comes to refer to the ongoing legacies of colonialism in these, you know, now independent and formally colonized states. And the easiest way to put this would be to say that post-colonialism now I hope can serve as a term to encompass these different approaches, these different critical approaches to the past, present, and unfortunate future of colonialism. So, of course, Australia is not a post-colonial society in the sense in which you're outlining. Australia is a settler colonial society, but post-colonialism, in the way in which we're using it, in perhaps a somewhat more technical term, references and encompasses these different critical approaches to colonialism that encompass decolonization, settler colonial critique, and anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century.
Sure. Thank you so much, Carlos. I think for myself and other Aboriginal academics that I talk to, we're trying to position ourselves in a space, and we're having conversations around perhaps, we need to establish an Aboriginal Academy of Thought, because we don't seem to have that space in Victoria as yet. And when we look at journals or groups with the term post-colonial, I will shy away from that, I must be honest, because we write about, we talk about, we experience that the colonist agenda in some ways, maybe not in that, in your face way, historically, but in other ways continues. So it's been really good to hear you talk and get some, deeper understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Let me just very quickly jump in. I think the idea of setting up such a project, such a Black Academy, as you're saying, would be a fantastic project. And IPCS would love to support something of that kind, but you're also welcome to come to IPCS and help us do some of that work as well. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Carlos. The question for Stephen that was in the chat is from Gloria, and she's really asking, how does one reach that feeling of security that you talked about, that was part of that sense of belonging? And I think probably, is this a physical thing, is it a financial thing, or is it an emotional component, that those different aspects of feeling a sense of security?
I think it's all of that. And I think more than that, actually, it's all of what you said. Plus, I didn't feel any different anymore. And the people treated me the same as that, whether I'm yellow or white or black, it didn't matter anymore. They spoke to me the same way. Let's say a white Australian will talk to me the same way, speak to me the same way as to a person of a different color. That's when I felt I'm part of society now. I'm part of a community. I'm part of a group now. And I also felt included, and I did say just now that they were also being inclusive or entering into my domain as well, which was, eating my food or speaking my language or observing my traditions. It goes both ways, and that's why I say before, it's a partnership here, and that's when you feel it, when we're all acting as one. We don't see color or type of food or color of the clothes we wear and all that, and that's when you find that I've arrived. I've really arrived. That's how you feel it. And I think it's the same in any society, actually. And whether you go to a different country, that's when you felt that you are part of that environment or that place.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Stephen. Jessica, you've got a question?
Thanks, Anthea. Yes, I've got a question for Julie about your wonderful new strategy that you're launching, and particularly about the way that you are, or that you have to date, but also as you develop the action plans that sit under that, how you're creating, excuse me, mechanisms to actually engage those diversity of voices and encourage diversity of decision-making within that structure, so that can actually be one of that the strategy itself and its action plans are something that is collectively owned and contributed to.
So it's fair to say it's a work in progress, but it's very important for us to engage with people with lived experience. So as I said, cultural and linguistic diversity is not at a mature point in the university, and I need to speak to the Vice-Chancellor about what mechanisms we build to engage with people from different, really diverse backgrounds. I have some ideas, but because I haven't spoken to him as yet, I've got to be a little careful. But to note that, say with those who experience disability, and I know this is a contested term, so I'm using it with some care here, that we have been engaging with some key groups across the university, and we look forward to engaging further with people with lived experience of disability, because we have a long way to go in that space as well. I've been recently, so Keith McVilly, for instance, who holds the Scope Chair in the university, we've had come to the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee to talk about what are the issues that we can tackle and where we can make strategic investment to assist and make things better. We have communities of practice in gender diversity that we regularly engage with, and the Pride and Action Network is another group of lived experience, people with lived experience who we talk to on a regular basis. So the intention absolutely is to talk to people with lived experience, to draw them into the decision making. The committee itself, I'm going to be completely honest, is terribly white and terribly sort of comes from particular positions. The reason why that committee has been established is that they are people in key decision-making roles. They actually have the capacity to change things in the university quite effectively. So what we've made the decision is that we get the people in the room who really have a great deal of influence and understanding of the institution to be able to change it, and then to engage with communities with lived experience to understand what needs to change and then be able to effectively change it very quickly. So it's no way a perfect model, but we are seeing that we can move reasonably quickly when we need to, so that the effectiveness of the structure, the broad structure, seems to be working well. And really in this space, we do need to be able to make change, not just talk about it and not just have ideas on the table that look great, but that then can't get embedded into the system. University is a very big place. Yes, it is a hierarchy. It has particular ways of working. We need to work within some of those structures to actually achieve the change we need to.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Julie, for that answer. But while you're still there, now I can see there are two questions from Charlene and Kofi who have their hands up, but there is one for Julie in the chat, which says, how can unis, this is for Navanita, it says, how can unis be held to account for the gross lack of diversity, not talking about the monochromatic and binary gender diversity in leadership? A lot of diversity inclusion gets limited to filling up ranks way low in the hierarchy of power and in celebrating and commemorating events.
Well, it's a very pointed question and it's a very difficult one to answer. I think I perhaps need to understand a little bit more about how the term diversity is being used, perhaps in the question. As I said, universities are hierarchies, and the people who end up in leadership roles often have to have long experience, but that's not to say that different knowledges shouldn't be valued, and there should be multiple pathways into that. When I became a senior leader in the institution, I was one of very few women. I still probably remain in the minority as female in those positions. And you know, it's not easy at times, and I'm crucially aware that the university's hierarchy is not as diverse as it should be. That means we have to work very hard to create opportunities to make sure that people from diverse backgrounds have the experience, have their knowledge valued, their experience valued, so that opportunities come for them to participate in hierarchical organisational structures. But at the same time, we have to make sure that they are not tokenistic, they are not there just to make it look good, that they are there genuinely for their own, their value that they bring to the organisation, to make sure that that they aren't necessarily the go-to person on that particular issue. I know that my Indigenous colleagues often get quite upset when they become the token Indigenous voice in discussions, and we try and work hard to make that they are genuinely members of the leadership team, not just there because of their indigeneity. But it is an enormously complex question. It is something that unfortunately takes time, and I'm not trying to defend the amount of time that it takes, but if we can liken the university to the Queen Mary, it takes a little time to turn it, and we are working hard to do that.
Great, thank you very much, Julie. I'll now turn to Charlene. Would you like to pose your question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to all the speakers today. They were really terrific and inspiring presentations. My question's for Julie, and it's sort of half an observation and half a question. Thank you so much for the work that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee have been doing. It sounds really rigorous and almost radical as well. Something that we've experienced, so I'm from the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, and in my previous role, is when trying to create initiatives that support diversity and inclusion for culturally and linguistically diverse groups, we have found that there's been some either passive resistance or active resistance to creating these because people see them to be in direct conflict with the work going on in the Indigenous space, which is, and from our perspective, we feel that there is room for both of these things. We shouldn't be, we don't want to be detracting from the work that is happening in the Indigenous space because it's important and needed, but we do feel that there is space for both. I just wondered, Julie, if you could maybe comment on how we become more inclusive in working with various groups that experience disadvantage within the university structures. Sorry, that might not have been too clear.
No, it was very clear. It is, in some ways, again, it's difficult territory. There isn't, I think there's perhaps not territory that isn't difficult in this space. My Indigenous colleagues have worked very, very hard to build up momentum, and there's a lot of change to go, and there's a recognition that in general, Indigenous Australians have faced systematic and absolutely disgraceful treatment over decades, and there is a lot of disadvantage that needs to be redressed over time. You might pick up from my accent that I'm actually half a Kiwi, and I always find it hilarious in New Zealand when they talk about a bicultural society, because New Zealand is no longer a bicultural society. It's not Pākehā and Māori. It has substantial groups of people hailing from different ethnicities, a strong Korean population, for instance, in Auckland. So you can't have binary here. Australia has long celebrated its multiculturalism. In fact, in some ways, it's, in my mind, we've stepped backwards from that celebration, and we should be re-embracing it. I think our commitment to supporting First Nations or Indigenous peoples is very strong in the institution. I think that gives us a level of maturity in which we can also turn and support other groups that are coming from different cultures, from different language groups, and that it will not diminish the work we are doing to support our Indigenous colleagues and students and the wider communities. So there's room for all, really, in my mind, and that we should be doing this. I keep talking about different points of maturity. That's the difficulty for me in my role, is to manage these things, but we should be encouraging support. We should be encouraging initiatives, and it doesn't matter where they come from. We're trying to set something up that allows all of those to flower over time and not just focus on particular ones, and there isn't meant to be any kind of competition here. So if I can assure you, from my point of view, we should be supporting these things, and they're not in competition.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Charlene. Now, Kofi Bediako.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine is not a question, it's a comment that I would want to make, linking it to the presentation of Julie and that of Stephen. But first of all, thank you all the presenters for the wonderful presentations. Julie, I would want to commend you and the committee for such a good work. I'll borrow the word of Charlene. I think that is it has a radical element in the sense that the statement that you made, which really struck chord with my recent thinking, is the idea that the university and minorities are working together to create the future that we are all hoping to create. Because I think the conventional knowledge would have been to try and then integrate the minorities into the university system. The thinking is that we always overestimate the stability of our values and imagine that where we are today was created without others, and that we have created a perfect system, and what others need to do is to fit into that system. I think the shift away from such a thinking and that minorities and the university need to work together is really commendable. And Stephen also made a very important point that we need to invite diversity into our group as well, and not only try to force diversity onto others. And I think that is a very critical point. Sometimes we probably would want to, if we are to be very realistic about it, there is some level of hypocrisy here where, well, it is others that must accept us. But when it is us accepting others, then you see some level of resistance. It should work both ways. And we should realize that the world has never been a world without others. We have always interacted with people, and the future is always interacting with other people. Okay.
Thank you very much, Kofi. Great, well said. Oh, now Vincent did have a question. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, but I think it has been addressed through Kofi's questions and Julie's responses. So I'm sorted. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Now, I haven't seen any more questions come up, but everybody is certainly enjoying the conversations very much. So I'll do one last call for any questions through the people putting their hands up. But otherwise, I would very much like to thank all of the speakers today. It's been an absolute delight to be chairing this session, and I've gained a great deal, and I'm curious about a whole lot of things that people have talked about. So Katy, I might hand it back to you. Katy, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Anthea. Thank you for chairing the panel, and thank you everyone for attending and your wonderful questions. And thank you, like Stephen, Carlos, Julie, for your wonderful presentation and sharing. And so we are going to have our lunch break. Today's schedule is a little bit more relaxing than the previous days. We are going to have like a 4-hour lunch break. So we are going to see everyone again at 4 o'clock for our book discussion in the afternoon. You will not want to miss this one. And we will use the same Zoom link for the book discussion. So everyone have a good break, have some good food. I'll see you later.